Alkebulan news will be with you momentarily. OG over the shoulder, holding it down.
black people, black wave, cancer change for black men, black business, black women, black face, black dollar, black school, black scholar, black doctor, black lawyer, black defender, black ball, black salon, black party, black design, black art, black face, black water, black panther, black artist, black mother, black father, black son, black daughter, black love, black honor, black today, black tomorrow, black wife, black hair, black kid, black chair, afro, black hair, love, we talk that black hair, black man, black word, black cat, black career, black black, black eyes, yeah, we talk that black hair. The moment that is bound to shape the future. I got a letter from the government the other day. I'm open to credit. They telling me to get it. It said that the message I was bringing was destruction. I put the pen to the sand and said, fuck them. Here's the land that never gave a damn about a brother like me from the surf. They rather be in slow. Face down, shot 5 or 6 times. With my kids and my mama get the job off ground last time. Stop lying. It's a black and white thing. Redneck ass, cause I'm such a watch that nigga hang. Then it's like what's white, not right. Fucking on see. Black men got the same needs as the Jew needs. Who me? I demand reparation, fucking cowboy. I'm a native brother, my nigga, I'm an African. Black man, walk down my way, what got me bringing for white boy, God, that's the training if you ask me. Why they tell me to ask me? I'm in trouble with these motherfuckers. And I'm a boy, just they calling me a nigga. They scared of me, so they gotta hide behind the nigga that's the bad ass. Fuck a homie with the bad. I'm a nigga with the daddy talk. You can get my black ass. Ain't no business to give me and give a man. Tell about the revolution, let these motherfuckers have it. I'm calling them the homie face, man, they come through. And I run with the niggas, you can't come through. Taking time for a time, taking 2 for 2, doing to others, and the others pushing hard to you. And now they saying this America's great, when America hates, set America straight, and America safe. Fuck that flag, my people are not really want to touch that flag. So what they try to tell me like what came for free, that they blaming me, and it's blaming me. They mad at that, cause I'm a mad at that. Yeah, I'm mad at that. Motherfucker, I'm black fucking soldier. Super push your skill was soldier, trying to make it your own. Shade man, go home. Overcame long nose, funny looking ass on. Got his nerve in the drinking president, Obama. If you don't want us around the letter C, spend money you been owing my people to think set free. That's 48% of you never came to get your still out there. Out there, it was ready to set free. Praising, praising, and praying. The God is that person beside ain't get taken. I was mistaken thinking scripture could have helped us. I was in the face of our very own oppressor. No just us. Look at how the aftermath of slavery today still affects us. Our kids educated about the enemy. And they don't know shit about their history. They ain't teaching at school. Leaving up to the cold. And all that cold. Let the bygones be bygones. And besides, even children on my home. Shut the fuck up, you know what? I will come out, niggas say, see they motherfucking. But I'm back still in the hour of the day out. The black lives still don't matter till you stay out. RBG. Out there, I tried all RBT, not a makeover. Yeah. The cops stop me just because you black, that's war. When they do the system, they break, that's war. When they call my little drug zone, that's war. Long Lord, shit. I ain't got a pocket, it's out to see what your brain went. This rap shit is way bigger than entertainment. It's the people versus shit when it all goes down. It's not pop versus shit, it's who's getting the power. The power ain't money, dog, it's self-determination. A nigga out and making this the real people station that's war. I mean, yeah, rap war, whatever war, it's that fast life, more or less, more souls in war. Dead prayers, the people radio. Yeah. Get down, all the things, biatch.
You are now listening to WRBG, the People's Radio. It's a takeover, not a makeover.
And yes, welcome once again to Alkebulan News with your combat reporter, Brother Thutmose Sankara, here with you live this evening. And what I would like to do this evening is give you a political treatise, present to you a volume of information that is absolutely pertinent and vital in the African revolutionary struggle in the United States. I talk of no other volume except Maroon the Implacable. Maroon the Implacable is a book written by now former political prisoner Russell Maroon Shoatz. And in this treatise, it is a set of writings. And within this set of writings, there are tidbits of information and strategies that one can use when one is in the field. And just to begin, I'd like to just to give you an analysis of what type of framework we're talking about in regards to Comrade Elder Russell Maroon Shoatz's thinking. And shout out to Russell Maroon III, shout out to Comrade Sister Teresa Shoatz also, and the whole Shoatz family. The foreword to Maroon the Implacable is to the outer world from within, the ferocity to be free. And if you don't know, Maroon is called Maroon because he escaped from the folk 3 times. He get on down, you know, and that's why they call him the Maroon, because of course we know Maroons were runaways. So he garnered that nomenclature. The first chapter, Introduction, the Revolutionary Maroon. Then there's Prelude, Fire in the Hole, Why Russell Maroon Shoatz is Important to Creative Revolutionaries by Fred Hope. About these writings, author's note by Russell Maroon. I am Maroon. Then there's Message from a Death Camp. There's 21st Century Political Prisoners, Real and Potential, written in 2002. Taxpayers in Prison, A Fool's Paradise, 2011. Death by Regulation, Pennsylvania Control Unit Abuses, from 95. And the one that we'll begin with this evening is the Black Liberation Struggle. There's the Black Liberation Struggle in Philadelphia from 2006. And then we'll begin this evening with Black Fighting Formations, Their Strengths, Weaknesses, and Potentials, written between 94 and 95. Also, there's The Dragon and the Hydra, a historical study of organizational methods. We will go into that as a follow-up. The Real Resistance to Slavery in North America, from 2005. Liberation or Gangsterism, Freedom or Slavery. We'll go over that one also this evening. That is from 2006. Respect Our Mothers, Stop Hating Women, from 2010 by Russell Maroon. Democracy, Matriarchy, Occupy Wall Street, and Food Security, 2011. That was an awesome essay. He broke all that stuff down about the Occupy movement and all of that. The Question of Violence, from 2012. And Afterward, Let Us Not Rest Until Justice is Done. And as an appendix, a summary of the case, Russell Maroon Shoatz, More Than 20 Years in Solitary Confinement. Appendix 2, Manifesto for Scientific Soul Sessions, which is the political education sessions that Russell Maroon suggested. And then there's Appendix 3, Eco-Socialist Horizons. Eco-Socialist Horizons. That is a awesome essay, also one that's near and dear to me. Being an environmentalist myself, being very close to the earth. But we want to go into this black fighting formations. In my last slide, I included that within a larger set of volumes with other books in a political education study. But I wanted to hone in on Maroon because the things that he gives us are very pertinent to now, and then we'll be moving up in that political analysis, moving to revolutionary warfare and techniques and things of that nature. But Maroon says a study of the various political organizations in the United States between the years of 1960 and 1994 will reveal a number of fighting formations. These formations were usually subdivisions or offshoots of larger organizations which were not primarily envisioned as combat groups. This lack of original dedication to a fighting mission will go a long way in helping to explain their strength, weaknesses, and potential. Not included in this study are the non-political black fighting formations found among the street gangs or those dedicated to criminal activity. However, mention will be made of them in regard to the loss of potential that black political fighting formations originally had. We must look to Sun Tzu and Karl von Clausewitz for the most concise writings on the philosophy of warfare, the ultimate reasons for engaging in it, and the main dynamics controlling its many variables. The Art of War and On War are mentioned by military practitioners around the world as two of the best tried and true volumes available on the subject. There have been many outstanding military practitioners of African descent as well. Thutmose III, who he says is the first imperial conqueror, Ramses II and Ramses III, consistent subduers of the barbarian and savage hordes of Europe and Asia, Queen Nzinga and Queen Tendance of Angola and Ethiopia, respectively, Shaka Zulu, Toussaint, Antonio Maceo, who outled and outfought vastly superior European armies in Haiti and in Cuba. Finally, we must add the outstanding guerrilla leaders among the Maroons and the African anti-colonial fighters. Although guerrilla warfare is often sufficient, it must be kept in mind that guerrilla warfare is only a subdivision of, and sometimes a forerunner to, total war. And he'll go into that total war later on. Despite the successes of these African warriors, there is very little written work available about them. Thus, we must rely on the work of Sun Tzu and Karl von Clausewitz. Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, instructs, war is a matter of vital importance to the state. It is the province of life and death and the road to survival or ruin. It is mandatory that it be studied thoroughly. In On War, Karl von Clausewitz states, war is an extension of politics by different means. Both of these authors demonstrate the connection between politics and warfare and the relative importance of both. Politics here is simply the science and art of governing people. It follows that those who are involved in shaping political affairs must recognize that they will, at some point, be required to pursue their political objectives by different means. As the road to survival or ruin, as Sun Tzu says, warfare. For the revolutionary, warfare cannot be a haphazard or belated consideration, as ignoring these principles, nonviolent pacifism, will ultimately lead to total destruction. Therefore, all of our black political organizations should have had a military component right from the beginning. From their inception, it will have been the mission of these military components to study and prepare for war. This presupposes that the political and military leadership is sagacious enough to discern both the long-range interests of their people and the potential conflicts that they will invariably encounter by pursuing these interests. In other words, our black political organizations should have known right from the beginning that they had to build a military component capable of defending our people from the attacks they were undergoing as a result of working to free themselves from oppression. Sadly, this was not the case. In order to understand better what must be done, now we need to learn from the mistakes of the past. When 1960 dawned, there were no black fighting formations, with the exception of the Nation of Islam's paramilitary wing known as the Fruit of Islam. This was formed largely in response to Malcolm X's tireless efforts. However, the Fruit of Islam was completely dedicated to internal security and static defense of the nation's leadership and property. It was further hobbled in qualitative development by the group's unwillingness to become actively involved in the civil rights struggle, where most of the action was taking place. Members of the Fruit of Islam were not much better than department store security guards, far removed from the reality of total war. Subsequent events would expose its weaknesses. To his credit, however, the Fruit of Islam had perfected a method of recruiting, organizing, and training, to the extent that training was done, that is unparalleled to this day. The secret of its success rested on the fact that it concentrated its main recruiting efforts among the most downtrodden segments of the community: the drug addicts, prison inmates, prostitutes, and destitute poor. It took a great effort to recruit and organize these people, but once they were fully brought into the organization, they became steadfast and loyal members of their new psychological family. By the time the Nation of Islam had fished them out of the mud, they had no other family that would stand by them, as they had burnt their bridge as well. These recruits were kept under extremely close supervision and were always provided with the means to acquire food, clothing, shelter, security, and entertainment, with usually social fellowship and religious trappings. The Fruit of Islam provided everything that a functioning family would provide its members. The organization itself had a nationalist sounding program, but no grand strategy to achieve any of its ends. The first dictum of war: war is a matter of vital importance to the state, and it's mandatory that it be studied thoroughly, was not observed. This statement is not just a matter of opinion. Events have proven this to be true. It does not take long to build military capability. You hear me? Of course, the organization has not had a free ride, as it continues to fight the government's infiltration and manipulation, in addition to the petty jealousies and rivalries that exist among leaders. Nevertheless, it's clear that with a few exceptions, the Fruit of Islam has thus far missed the boat when it comes to being an important black fighting formation. The Civil Rights Movement was launched in 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott and quickly spread throughout the South. In addition to many local groupings, which in some cases had already been active in their communities, a number of other organizations began to emerge on the national scene by 1960. SCLC, CORE, SNCC, NAACP had been around since the early 1900s. From 55 to 65, all the major actions taking place in the Black freedom struggle occurred in the South, and the aforementioned organization led these struggles. Each of these organizations professed nonviolence as their strategy, but ultimately relied on someone else's armed force to protect them, usually that of the U.S. government, with disastrous results. These groups would call ahead to the FBI and alert them to their plans, requesting protection. The FBI, in turn, would contact members of the local police force, who were often card-carrying Ku Klux Klansmen, or would contact their undercover agents, operatives in the Klan, who would subsequently organize a shooting, burning, bombing, or killing. These organizations were violating every rule in the art of war. Instead of observing the rule, destroy your enemy and preserve yourself, they were actually aiding their enemy in their own destruction. This exact pattern was repeated to one degree or another when the government provided U.S. Marshals or federal troops. Despite this short-sighted, cowardly, and disastrous strategy, because of the heroic sacrifices made by rank and file, largely black men, women, and children, a number of changes were forced through during this period of time, and here's where it gets important. The Monroe County, North Carolina NAACP branch was headed by a black man named Robert F. Williams, who saw clearly on that his chapter of the NAACP would suffer countless casualties and could not survive unless they got rid of the nonviolent approach and adopted an armed self-defense strategy. This brother strongly advocated that all blacks in the United States should adopt armed self-defense. Williams walked this talk, as his Monroe County NAACP branch was both armed and trained. Because of this, its members survived a number of shootouts with the local KKK, citizens and police. Unfortunately, he could not affect any widespread acceptance of his methods, and his chapter was therefore isolated. After a so-called kidnapping of some white people, he was forced to leave the country. He continued his work while in exile by traveling throughout Africa and visiting China and other things. At the same time, an organization called Deacons for Defense and Justice was formed in both rural Alabama and Mississippi. Unlike Williams Monroe County chapter, the Deacons for Defense and Justice was not a subdivision of the NAACP. Rather, it was an offshoot and therefore and autonomous from the National Nonviolent Leadership. The Deacons recruited, organized, and trained solely from this perspective. Because of this, they were more sophisticated than any other part-time militant black organization during the Civil Rights struggle. For instance, the Deacons provided a tightly organized security and communications net around some of the most important civil rights marches. While the civil rights group provided their posted marshals with armbands, the Deacons had roving patrols armed with automatic rifles. After a few skirmishes and firefights with Klan and Night Riders, part Klan who were afraid to show their faces during the day, they gave the Deacons a wide berth. Ultimately, however, the Deacons had a circumscribed potential for growth due to the civil rights movement's overall strategy of reliance on U.S. government protection. So even though you had good protection, the best protection, the Deacons for Defense never lost the battle. You still rely on the government. Maroon is laying out these strategies, analysis of different fighting formations. Rural Mississippi had also made believers out of young SNCC cadre. SNCC had started its Mississippi Freedom Summer campaign in 1964 as nonviolent activists. After experiencing the death of several of their comrades and supporters and the raw terror that the police and Klan and Night Riders inspired, all of the SNCC cadre had armed themselves by the time they left Mississippi. SNCC leader H. Rap Brown was arrested when a rifle and banana clips were found in his luggage after a flight to Mississippi. SNCC eventually changed his name from to the Student National Coordinating Committee, dropping the nonviolent description. Yet it was too little too late, as the momentum was already shifting to the cities of the North and West. SNCC's last effort in 1965 was to organize the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, whose emblem was a Black Panther with no direct association with the Black Party. Well, there was a direct association because Brother Kwame Ture went there at Huey and Bobby's request. The Lowndes County Freedom Party organization adopted armed self-defense from the beginning. Although they experimented with the slogan Black Power, they did not make any far-reaching progress, as their political goal was still civil rights. The 1965 Watts Rebellion in California was the signal that the momentum in the Black struggle was shifting to the cities. Within 2 years, a number of rebellions occurred in other major cities and small towns. This was a qualitatively different situation. Rather than peaceful demonstrations seeking to acquire civil rights, these events were massive and widespread rebellions. Watts, 34 dead. New York, Philly, Birmingham, and Newark, 26 dead. Detroit, 43 dead. And in each case, there were hundreds wounded with massive property damage. The keen political observer could not miss the parallel between these rebellions and those that had preceded revolutions and armed struggles in other countries. But guess what was missing from this equation? No urban-based Black political groups had armed components. There were no Black fighting formations to organize, control, and direct these rebellions. The Fruit of Islam was clearly not up to the job because they had not been able to properly respond to the killing and shooting of their members by the local police. Nor could the rural-based groups lend any support, as they were still involved in life and death struggles with the Klan and Southern police. SNCC made a half-hearted attempt to transfer their operations to urban areas. However, besides H. Rap Brown and a few others, it seemed that after their Southern experience, SNCC was scared off. The urban rebellions brought forth scores of new political formations, and these formations generally adhered theoretically to the idea of armed self-defense. Along with this shift in tactics came the new nationalist-sounding politics, which were usually a separatist bent, although the rediscovery of Pan-Africanism began to occur as well. Unfortunately, these new formations adopted the high-profile strategy of the civil rights movement, which brought excessive media coverage. In reality, these organizations were no longer part of the civil rights movement and were now involved in the Black liberation struggle. The civil rights people needed this type of exposure to get their message across and to help protect them against the most flagrant abuses. The Black liberation struggle, however, demanded a more clandestine way of handling affairs. It had to prepare for a guerrilla war and to take on this preparation in secret. And so we've discussed this before about separating the above ground and the below ground, and the mistakes that were made. Just the what happened. I mean, because I don't really try to be that critical on the party members and those comrade elders and fighters, because it's like, how else could you have responded? Who could have known that you would become involved in this armed struggle against the greatest military power ever created in the history of the world and its intelligence agency? So we have to look at these things, see what was done, and analyze them in a way going forward where we don't make those same mistakes. This fact was lost on the new younger generations. They were impressed by Malcolm X and the fiery orators, but did not realize that Malcolm X had served as a motivator and educator. They did not understand that they were embarking on a new phase that demanded quiet, patient organizing and training. The tens of thousands of potential recruits were already showing through the massive rebellions that they were already sufficiently stimulated and were waiting for someone to show them how to get the job done. There was still a good deal of agitation, propaganda, and education that needed to be done, but not by those who saw their mission as forming Black fighting formation. This mistake was usually made because these groups tried to combine the activities of the military and political workers in the same cadre. Remember, above ground and below ground. They did not realize that the situation demanded specialization. Both political workers, motivators, educators, marchers, and military workers, armed self-defense, and assault units. The deacons had it right. An outstanding practitioner of this new form of resistance was the Revolutionary Action Movement, which began an intensive organization and campaign in the northeastern states in 66 and 67. Much of his activity was centered in Philly. Ram was militant, nationalist, and high profile. His cadre spray painted, "Join the Black Guard," slogan on walls in the communities. The Black Guard was their public military arm. Ram's leaders were in front of the cameras and on all important issues, and the Black Guard cadre could often be seen at their cultural centers wearing fatigues and black berets. The sisters and brothers in Ram Youth Group, the Liberators, dressed in black with black berets. These activities helped members of the Black community feel good and believe the revolution was right around the corner. Ironically, no one in Philadelphia had heard of the similar group, which began in California, known as the Black Panther Party for Defense and Justice. Ram's activities scared white folks, especially those because some members of Ram went out of their way to ensure this. They reasoned that they had been kept down long enough and it was time to strike back. Unfortunately, in 67, the white establishment struck back too. And over a period of months, H. Brown and other leaders in key cadre were arrested. While Ram advocated self-defense and owned weapons, its members did not carry them in public. Consequently, they were arrested for everything from jaywalking to conspiring to put cyanide in the police department rations at a major holiday celebration. Ram had not fired a shot. However, some alleged members and supporters were arrested, bringing dynamite back from Canada, allegedly to blow up the Statue of Liberty. Once again, just like the Panther 21. These arrests crippled Ram, right? So that is the analysis of. So we're coming up through the time as he's making these analysis. Ultimately, the government's success in carrying out this campaign, the original coordinators, of course, this attack on Ram, you have to study that. Baba Ahmed, he lays that stuff out. But the situation with the Black Panther Party for Defense and Justice was somewhat different. This group, founded in 1966 in Oakland, followed the same pattern as Ram, but it had an advantage. there was a clause in the California state law that allowed citizens to carry arms in public as long as they were not loaded. The BPP took full advantage of this in order to brandish weapons wherever they went. At that time, this seemed to be the height of militancy, and they received more attention than any other group from the community, media, and police. Despite this attention, they could not be dealt with as easily as Ram because Ram always carried loaded weapons. After a few confrontations with the police, it became apparent that the police could not bluff or intimidate these young blacks. Because of this, BPP members were provoked in the gun battles with police, and within a year, co-founder Huey Newton had been shot and was in prison for killing the cop who shot him. Lil Bobby Hutton was the first BPP member to be killed after 2 carloads of Panthers were ambushed by the police. Others were wounded in jail. Bobby Seale, the other co-founder, had been jailed for marching into the state capitol with other Panthers to protest the new law that prohibited carrying guns in public. The top 3 leaders, Newton, Seale, and Elge Cleaver, who was captured after a shootout with the police in which Hutton was killed, were all in prison, along with other key leaders and cadre. So you see this quick move to open militancy, whereby which you come under this open attack. And as Russell Maroon is saying earlier, we must form these fighting formations from the beginning, having it as an established idea to have the above ground formation and have the below ground armed formations, and keep them separate. That's part of military organization in regards to it. Then the officers in this their information is compartmentalized. Not everybody has all of the information. That's how you organize a military. That is how you set the intelligence network within that military from the top hierarchy, right? So coming down through this period of time with these black fighting formations, of course, with the Black Panther Party, we know the matriculation of the assaults by the FBI against them, the Panther 21 trial, the imprisonment, the shooting, imprisonment, and escape of Auntie Assata, the exploits and the manhunt for Baba Matulu and so many others. And also to just look at it from a positive side, I just always see that having Herman Bell and Sekou Odinga and Yoruba Ben Wahad and Eddie Conway and all of these ex-political prisoners, the MOVE comrades, home represents a victory for the African liberation struggle in the United States, because if you take advantage of it, if you look at it from a historical perspective, then you will see that you have access, direct access, to some of the greatest revolutionary historians in the history of the world. If you look at MOVE and what happened to them, what do you think is in these people's mind? What experience do they have about repression from the United States government? But I want to go on, because Maroon is giving you, he's going through some of these, as I just described, the shootout with Auntie Assata, BLA member Kwesi Balagoon, escaped from New Jersey State Prison. He was part of BLA task force that liberated Assata Shakur, Sitawayo, Robert Said Joyner, Cliff Futch. Some of these names you may not have heard of. Joseph Jojo Bowen, of course, Rochelle St-Q McGee. These comrades, these great freedom fighters, and of course, Field Marshal George and his brother Jonathan. These are the freedom fighters of the African liberation struggle in the history of the United States. When you start to name these names, you put together a collection of studies in order to be able to have access to this information. If that's what you're trying to do, if you're trying to liberate something, then you got to go to the people who did that and got the experience with it from before. That's only, it just makes sense, right? So Maroon, at the end of this chapter, Black Fighting Formations, he did say that the BLA had attempted to recruit and reintegrate political workers who had left or been expelled from the BPP. Right, so there was an attempt at reorganization of your fighting forces. So we look at the history. We see the repression, we see the attacks, we see the killings, the imprisonment, and then you see a reorganization. And whatever revolution you study, from the Chinese to the Cuban to the Vietnamese, the Korean, you will see that each and every time you will see build up of forces, the repression, the attack by whoever is coming against them, and then you'll see them reorganize themselves back into formations and go forward into victory. That occurs every time. You got to be able to face the repression and then reorganize yourself. And the Black Panther Party, with its reorganization, became the Black Liberation Army. Those activities being centered and focused mostly here on the East Coast. When you can go to a website, the Talking Drum, and there are these topics at the bottom of the page, a whole bunch of topics, and one is called the Freedom Fighters, and it has a list on there on the talkingdrum.com of the actions of the Black Liberation Army. This is from the perspective of the FBI, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. That's why I say you have to do your cross research to get into the real revolutionary history. But I want to leave you with something else too, because what we're dealing with, this internecine warfare that is being foisted upon us, right, by imperialists, by capitalists. Capitalists are paying young men to make songs about killing each other and then actually do it. And whoever pulls off the most prolific killings gets the most money. Musical mercenaries, called drill music, all across the country, beginning in Chicago and down in Memphis, and these guys, Fulio and Ace, down in where I'm from, in Jacksonville, and down in Baton Rouge. All of these places, record company executives pay these guys money. It ain't like before, based on the number of CDs you sell out your trunk. Ain't nobody got CDs no more. The sales is based upon views and whatever these record company executives see as being the most popular, and based upon the actions of these young men, basically setting them up for prison. They're rapping about what they actually have done. It's just the silliest thing ever, right? And so Maroon gives us this particular article, this treatise called Liberation or Gangsterism, Freedom or Slavery, from 2006, right? I want you to check Maroon on this one. The first wave, 1955 to 1980. The civil rights movement in the South successfully motivated Black, Puerto Rican, Euro-American, Native American, Chicano, Mexicano, Indigenous, and Asian youth to use their time, energies, creativity, and imagination to discover their true self-worth and earn the respect of the entire world while struggling towards broader goals that were not measured by one's material possessions. Over time, each segment cheered on, supported, worked in solidarity with, and or discovered their committed interests, and closely linked missions connected to broader goals. The Black youth elevated the civil rights movement to become Black power and Black liberation movements. Puerto Rican youth energized their elders' ongoing struggle for independence for their home island. Euro-American youth attacked the lies, hypocrisy, and oppression their parents were training them to uphold in the schools, in society, and overseas. Native American youth were returning to their suppressed ancestral ways and fighting to regain control over some of the land. Asian youth were struggling to overcome a system and culture that had always used and abused them. Indeed, all of them came to clearly see that education, jobs, money, hustles, and material trappings could not, by themselves, win them the victories they needed or the new type of dignity and respect they deserve. Yet, here we are, 30 years later, and the youth nowadays are ridiculed, have been stripped of their hard-earned freedom, self-respect, and dignity. They're again being told over and over that the only way to regain these things is to acquire education, skills, jobs, or the right hustle, and to once again accumulate as much money and material things as possible. How the hell did we get back to 1955? What's Maroon crazy? Strategic tricks used against the youth, right? Understanding these tricks in their various guises and refinements is the key to everything. You'll never really understand what happened to get us to the present moment or be able to really move forward until you become a master at recognizing them and at devising ways to defeat them, right? We talk about our children. Russell Maroon tell you this strategic trick used against the youth. We got to know and how to attack it, to overcome it. We can need them in the zone, right? Number one, co-option. Make them rap. Glamorization of gangsterism. How about that? Separation from the most advanced elements. That means that they don't get access to us, those revolutionary freedom fighters. Indoctrination in reliance on passive approaches. That means their parents told them they got to trust in the law. Raw fear. You're just scared. I think that might be the majority. And drugs. And, today is the proliferation of, a lot of these children's mind is gone. But co-option, Russell Maroon goes on to say, was used extensively to trick just about all of the first wave youth into believing that they had won the war. Strategically, among every segment of the youth that we can name, university students to lower class communities, billions of dollars were made available. Supposedly, these funds were to enable the youth to determine what should be done to carry out the far-reaching changes they desire. In reality, they were being expertly monitored and subtly coaxed further and further away from their most radical and advanced elements. Wow. Mainly through control of this funding. This was part of the strategy adopted by ruling class foundations, by government, and by corporate America for defeating the youth with sugar-coated bullets. In time, consequently, substantial segments of these previously rebellious youth found themselves fully absorbed and neutralized by either directly joining foundations, corporations, university faculties, approved community groups, or by becoming full-fledged junior partners after winning control of thousands of previously out-of-reach political offices and government posts. The same trick is being used today. Glamorization of gangsterism, however, was then and continues to be the most harmful trick played against lower class segments of youth. Males in particular were and continue to be most susceptible to this gambit, especially when combined with a prolonged exposure to raw fear. Let me illustrate by considering two historic groups which presently enjoy nothing less than iconic status among just about everyone who is aware of them. Yet, their documented history clearly shows how the trick was and continues to be played throughout this country. Therefore, the following is a brief but clear history of how the original Black Panther Party was bludgeoned and intimidated to the point where its key leaders consciously steered the group into accepting the glamorization of gangsterism. Because this represented less of a threat to ruling class interests, the BPP wanted temporary respite from the raw fear which ruling circles in the United States had been leveling against them. In the process, however, these leaders who went along with this gangster emphasis totally destroyed the organization. Secondly, we would consider the Nation of Islam connected Black Mafia, which had a different background. But the same two tricks were played against them. Left in their wake was a sordid tale of young Black men who were again turned from seeking to be liberators into ruthless oppressors of their own communities, never once engaged in their real enemies and oppressors, the ruling class. Hands down, the original BPP won more attention, acclaim, respect, support, and sympathy than any other youth of their time. At the same time, They provoked more fear and worry in ruling class circles than any domestic group since President Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower presided over the neutralization of the labor movement and the U.S. wing of the Communist Party. The BPP was even more feared than the much larger civil rights movement. According to the head of the FBI, they were the biggest threat to America. That threat came from their ability to inspire other youth, both in the U.S. and globally, to act in similar ways. On the other hand, the Nation of Islam had been active since 1930. Yet it also experienced a huge upsurge in membership in the same period as the BPP, due mainly to the charismatic personality of Malcolm X and his aggressive recruitment techniques. This continued after Malcolm's assassination, fueled by the overall rebellious spirit of the youth looking for some group that would lead them in the fight against the system. There's a mountain of documents that clearly show that the highest power in the country classified both groups as Class A threats, ones that they wanted to either neutralize or destroy, even musing that if this goal could be achieved, they could then use similar methods to defeat youth in the rest of the country. So how did they do it? Against the BPP, they used a combination of co-option, glamorization of gangsterism, separation from the most advanced element, indoctrination and impassive approaches, and raw fear. Every trick in the book. Right? These were developed and used as early as against Marcus Garvey's UNIA and in early 1900s during the Palmer raids against Euro-Americans of the anarchist or left social bent in the 1930s, crushing the industrial workers of the world and neutralizing other socialists and in underground work that contributed to the defeat of Germany and Italy during World War II. So Maroon is giving you an analysis, right, across the board, internationally, of youth and how revolutionary movements have been carried out and how they have been recruited in it and how the United States imperialism is swaying our youth away from being involved in revolutionary organization. And we must study these techniques. We must study these points that he said, this glamorization of gangsterism, which we know, and co-option and all the other things, and devise techniques to recruit our children, make fighting cool again, right? Russell Maroon goes on to say, the co-option depended upon the state being able to neutralize BPP co-founder, by that time an icon, Huey P. Newton, and then using him combined with other methods to split the BPP and lead Newton's wing along reformist lines, while forcing the still revolutionary wing into an all-out armed confrontation before it was ready. In this way, the repressive forces hope to either kill, jail, exile, or break the BPP's will to resist and send its cadre into an ineffective underground existence. What's more, even with the BPP's extraordinary status globally, no country seemed to want to risk the wrath of the United States by openly allowing the BPP to train guerrilla units on their soil. Surprisingly, therefore, Huey Newton was allowed to leave jail with the murder charge for killing a policeman still pending. Thus, the government and courts had him on a short leash. With that leash, they hoped to control his actions, although probably not through any direct agreements. Sadly, the still politically naive BPP cadre and other youth who looked up to Newton can only imagine that they had forced his release. Today, some veterans from those times still insist on clinging to that tripe. Yet it seems Newton had other ideas. And since he was not prepared to go underground and joining his fledgling Black Liberation Army, he almost immediately began to follow a reformist script that was completely at odds with his own earlier theories and writings. This script was also at odds with basic principles that were being practiced by oppressed people around the world to good effect. Further, he used his almost complete control of BPP Central Committee to expel many veteran and combat-tested BPP cadre in imitation of the Stalinist and Euro gangster posture he would later become infamous for. Wow. involving an all-out shooting war to suppress any BPP members who would not accept his independently derived reformist policies. At the same time, and on a parallel track, U.S. and local police intelligence agents were using their now infamous COINTELPRO operation to provoke the split between Newton's wing and other less compliant BPP members, which was finally consummated in 1971 after Newton's shooting war and purge forced scores of the most loyal, fearless, and dedicated above-ground BPP members to go underground. There, they were joined by those other BPP members who were already functioning as an offensive armed wing. They were known by names such as Panther Wolves, African American Liberation Army, and Black Liberation Army. But only the last one stuck. I love Maroon. The BLA had already become a confederation of clandestine guerrilla units of mostly Black revolutionary nationalists from any number of formations who were willing to accept the BPP's leadership and who also accepted Huey Newton as their Minister of Defense. But obviously, Newton didn't see it that way. Most telling, it was later learned that Newton's expensive penthouse apartment, where he had other Central Committee members handle any number of sensitive BPP issues, was under ongoing surveillance by intelligence agents who had another apartment down the hall. Thus, Newton and his faction were boxed in, unable to follow anything but government-sanctioned scripts, unless he went underground, which only occurred when Newton fled to Cuba after his gangster antics threatened the revocation of his release under pending legal matters that the government still had over his head. In addition to the glamorization of gangsterism, there was something that the various ruling class elements had begun to champion and push on the Black lower classes, as I come to a conclusion. Follow the psychology, right? You could be Black, cool, rebellious, dangerous, rich, have respect, women, cars, fine clothes, jewelry, an expensive home, and even stay high. As long as you don't fight the system or its cops. But if you don't go along with that script, get ready to go back to the early days to shootouts with the cops and ending up in the graveyard, in prison, on the run, or in exile. You can still be cool, even as a Huggy Bear style snitch or his buddy, modern day futuristic cat, Cypher of the Matrix, right? Who tried to betray Zion in return for a fake life as a rich, steak-eating movie star. Most importantly, no more fight with the agents. Get it? So Newton began to indulge in drugs as a way to relieve the stress of all that he was facing. He became a drug addict, plain and simple. That, however, didn't upset the newly constructed gangster cool that Hollywood, the ruling class, and the government were pushing, although many BPP cadre and other outsiders were very concerned about it. But Newton's control was by then too firmly fixed for anyone to challenge it, except the BLA, which by then was in a full-blown guerrilla war with the government. Right? It's like you see the psychology of what they were facing, the decisions that they had to make as leadership, right? In classical Euro gangster fashion, Newton had turned to preying on segments of the community that he had earlier vowed to liberate. But of course, the police and government were wise to him. Since there was no true connection to an underground, there was no rational way to ratchet up the pressure on the police, the government, and the still fully operational system of ruling class control and oppression. Newton's BPP had been reduced to relying completely on methods that were officially sanctioned. Consequently, we can all see, we see all of the government's efforts bearing fruit. Newton's faction of the BPP had limited itself to either legal or underworld style approach, co-optation, or indoctrination in reliance on passive approaches that were passive towards the status quo. He fell for the trick of severing all relations with the armed underground, the BLA, which would lead the BPP, if it got to the next level of struggle, open armed resistance to the oppressors. This was separation from the most advanced elements. Remember that? That's one of the 5. It pains to read it, but the healing is in carrying out without making those same mistakes. Finally, it says, well, because of Newton's control, his faction was immersed in the glamorization of gangsterism. Finally, Newton and his faction, along with activists from other American radical and revolutionary groups, succumbed to the terror and raw fear that was being leveled against them. All but those who waged armed struggle were jailed, killed, exiled, forced into hiding, or into continuing their activism underground. So you have to see the ways in which, as Russell Maroon has laid it out, that we, as New Africa, approaching the African liberation struggle in this geographical region of the United States, how we use these treaties and these methods that Russell Maroon has laid out. First of all, giving us an analysis of the Black fighting formations, and I would say that deserves a deeper study of the Deacons for Defense and Revolutionary Action Movement. But in conclusion, we have to study how the tricks that are being used against the youth and how we overcome them. Those tricks of co-option, glamorization of gangsterism, separation from the most advanced elements, indoctrination and reliance on passive approaches, raw fear, and drugs. If we want to see our liberation, we're going to have to find a way to recruit those youth into the armed forces of New Africa. This has been your combat reporter here on Alkebulan News. And remember, as always, African family, stay vigilant.
Black power.
Black power.